I've been working on a honey white chocolate ganache for a while now, and I think while it is relatively easy with a standard white chocolate ganache recipe with the pastry cream style I like, it's been a little bit trickier, but I want to show you my entire process, including the shell, if that is something you want. Otherwise, if you're just here for the ganache, skip ahead a few minutes. Of course, at home with a small batch, I really love to use the French method. So here in the bowl of my KitchenAid, you see some room temperature egg whites. Then as soon as they start looking white and frothy, but they're not really whipping up to peaks yet, that's when I start adding in my sugar mixed with some cream of tartar. The cream of tartar is optional. I just like to add it in there. It helps a little bit with the strength of the meringue and therefore the structure of the macaron. Once I start incorporating my sugar, I like to increase that speed a little bit, and then I'll increase it one more time once I get all the sugar incorporated. I like to add it in a little bit at a time over the course of several minutes. That just helps again so you don't have a big clump of sugar at the bottom and with the structure of your overall meringue. Then after everything's incorporated, you whip a little bit more, you're starting to see some peaks. This is when I like to add my food coloring. I love combining different shades or tones of the same color, and this is no different. I really like using the lemon yellow as kind of a base color, but it's a little bit too vibrantly yellow for me. So I really like to tone that down by using something like Autumn Gold from the Sugar Art. And I'm just going to whip that to a really nice stiff peak and transfer my meringue to a larger, wider bowl. At this point, I'm going to add in my dry ingredients, fold those in to make sure everything is combined, and then I will do the macaronage process. I always like to include the entire macaronage process in all my videos where I'm showing the macaron shell because I find that this is the stage where people have the most questions, and I think with the macaronage I could explain it in excruciating detail with my words, but unless you see it happening, I think it can still be a little bit tricky to understand. So I try to keep this for the most part in most of my videos just regular speed. This is actually how long it took me. This is actually my process. This is what I did. There's a lot of scraping around the sides of the bowl, pulling the batter through the center, that kind of thing. Though many people have slightly different processes that they like to follow to get to that ribbon stage. If you have questions about other parts of the process, particularly the meringue, or if you're wondering what might happen if you over or under mix, make sure to check out some of my other start to finish and what if videos. After I get to that ribbon stage, I just transferred my batter to my piping bag with my piping tip. Usually I use an 804 or an 803, and then today I'm using a Silpat that already has a template in it. Otherwise, you can use any regular old Silpat or whatever you like to bake on with a template underneath, just to make sure your macarons are more or less the same size. I just left this plain. I really just wanted to focus on the filling and letting that shine, and they were not for an event or anything, so I didn't need a decoration per se. But as these are honey fig macarons, especially with that honey ganache, I think this would be the perfect macaron to have some sort of cute bee design on, or like a honeycomb design on, or like Pooh Bear kind of design. I think there are a lot of cute decoration options, and I also think there are a lot of really simple decoration options, such as using bee pollen like it sprinkles, or using a bit of a white chocolate drizzle after these are baked to create a little bit more of a maybe sophisticated or elegant look while still adding a bit to the shell. Usually I rest my macs for about 20 to 25 minutes, and I bake them one tray at a time at 300 degrees Fahrenheit for about 16 to 18 minutes. While those are baking and cooling, I'm going to get started on my ganache. As I mentioned, I really wanted to transform my standard pastry cream style ganache into a honey version. So I'm using 2 different kinds of honey. Otherwise, it's more or less the same. When I first tried it, I just used a very liquid honey like this, and I found that the ganache ended up being a little bit too liquid. But this time I used both the softer honey and then also this really, really firm local honey that had some bee pollen in it, and it's delicious. So I'm going to get some of my cream into my saucepan here. I am using still a little bit of sugar. It is reduced from my normal batch because of all the honey. You could probably leave it out because of the amount of honey in here, but I did not find this overly sweet personally, so that's something that you can adjust on your own if you want to. So I have the more liquid honey in here. I think I could have gone with the thicker honey in here as well. This was just one of my trials that I happened to film, and I think this is a really great moment to work with local honey, or a honey that you really love, or one you've gotten on your travels or something like that. So I've got some cream and cornstarch in another little bowl, and the rest of my ingredients are just off to the side. So these 2 little components here in the saucepan over kind of a low heat, and then in the bowl I'm just going to basically make a pastry cream. So I'll slightly warm the cream, sugar, honey mixture, and then once it is a little bit warmer, I will stream it in and temper it into the cream and cornstarch, then transfer everything back into the saucepan. I did not add any vanilla to this. I really wanted the honey to shine through and have its own moment, depending on what you are going to be doing with this ganache. If it's only ganache, if you have a filling like fig that you want to add, if you have another flavor that you want in there, I think you can do honey something. It could be vanilla, it could be cinnamon, it could be almond, whatever it is. I think there are a ton of delicious options, but I think because honey is a relatively soft, delicate flavor, but given the chance, it can really shine. I think this is one of those moments that even vanilla might be a little bit overpowering. So that's why I left it out of this recipe, though of course it is up to you if you want to add that in there. So now I've got everything back in the saucepan, and again I'm going to cook this like a pastry cream. I'm going to whisk it relatively constantly over a low to medium low heat until it thickens up. I'll let it cook for a couple more seconds and then take it off the heat. If you walk away, the bottom might thicken and curdle a bit before the top cooks completely. It might end up in some weird lumps. It has a risk of burning. So it's really not something that you want to multitask if you can avoid it. If you have never made a pastry cream before, and if this recipe seems a little bit stressful, but you still want to try making a honey ganache, absolutely take a more simple, basic white chocolate and cream ganache recipe and add in some honey. I think if anything, maybe you might want to reduce the cream just by a little bit, just especially if you're using more liquid honey in there. I find that with a more basic, just cream and chocolate ganache, those for me are very intensely chocolatey and usually a bit on the sweet side. Because this style of ganache has a much higher ratio of cream and butter, that really helps to temper out both the white chocolate flavor and the sweetness that the white chocolate brings. That's why I really wanted to take the time and effort to make this style ganache into a honey ganache. I think that the sweetness from the honey and that floral note, if there's too much white chocolate, adding something that is additionally sweet and floral could easily turn quite cloying. So that is something that I wanted to avoid and why I didn't try adding honey to that kind of recipe. So I don't have a ton of experience with it, but it is certainly worth a try. Absolutely go for it if that feels more comfortable. All right, now that it's starting to bubble, I'm just going to turn off the heat. It is nice and thick, very evenly thick and creamy looking. I'm just pouring it over my white chocolate that I've melted very slightly in my microwave just for about 30 seconds. After giving this a few seconds just to more thoroughly melt, I gave that a stir and then waited about 15 to 20 minutes. That is super important to cool a little bit more. You want this warmer than room temperature, but not cold when you do this emulsification here. So I am going to use my immersion blender to emulsify first just that chocolate mixture. It should look like this, even if in the beginning it looks a little bit weird and lumpy. It should look really smooth and thick and creamy like this. That is when you start adding in your butter, room temperature butter, a little bit at a time. Again, emulsifying that in with your immersion blender. I know I've said this 1,000 times, but if you do not have an immersion blender, this might not be the recipe for you. Having an immersion blender is so important in pastry. After all the butter is incorporated, I am just going to once again emulsify in the honey. This time it is that really thick, creamy kind of local honey. If you wanted to add in some extra bee pollen or something like that, I think this would be a really great time to do that. Then I'm just going to set this aside to completely cool to room temperature. I really like to spread it out in a sheet pan lined with plastic wrap because I like when my ganache cools in a really nice, even thin layer. That is just my preference. Usually with this style ganache, I find that it is perfect just at room temperature. This, I think because of the honey, was a little bit on the thinner side. So for this one, I would recommend after it comes to room temperature and before you fill your macarons, maybe pop it in the fridge for about 30 minutes to an hour, just so that it can thicken up a little bit more. And then it should be a really good consistency to pipe with. That's especially important if you want to add a filling like the fig that I'm adding here. Usually with a ganache that's even a little bit on the looser side, you can pipe it right in the middle and it's fine. Even if it spreads out a little bit, it's okay. But here, because I'm piping a ring of this and then I have some fig jam that I bought at my local grocery store, I really needed it to not go anywhere. So as you can see, just by putting this ganache in the refrigerator for 30 to 60 minutes, it is totally fine. It is softer than some of my normal ganaches of this style, but it is absolutely fine and manageable. And most importantly, super delicious. I am not kidding you. Not only I love this and my family, though to be honest, they tell me they love everything. My customers and people who bought this were absolutely raving about this flavor, really genuinely loved it, and I have to agree with them. Even though this seems like it might just be an okay flavor, a good flavor, but nothing too out of the ordinary. It's just honey, white chocolate, and fig. It's really delightful. It is just the right amount of sweet. It has that little bit of the earthy fruitiness from the fig inside, that floral note from the honey. Oh my gosh, yeah, here's a look of a bite of that. You can see the fig jam inside. It was worth it. I really hope you give this recipe a try. If you do, make sure to tag me on Instagram so I can see your results as well. And if you're not already subscribed, make sure to do that so you don't miss out on my future videos. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye!